Hello, everyone. How's it going? I've been thinking recently about um, the topic of fun. And so today, I'd like to share a few thoughts about rules, goals, games, and fun. And I I was inspired by this actually from children, um, which may not be surprising. I mean, aren't kids the best at having fun? And and one of the things that I think we get out of practice in as we grow and as we age, perhaps, is having fun. I mean, maybe that's not you. Maybe you are really good at having fun. Um, you know, having a, a physical limitation, having chronic pain for over 16 years, perhaps played a role in kind of reducing my focus over the years on fun. And of course, over the past 5 years, as I've been doing a whole lot of work around, you know, how to disempower pain, how to live abundantly despite a physical limitation, this topic has come to mind and has actually been a focus um, to create that life, create an abundant, full life while being impacted by physical limitations or pain. So, um, so there's going to be, so maybe there's some nuggets in here for you. If you haven't found yourself uh, very focused on having fun, listen up. But if you have been very focused on fun, um, share your thoughts, share your ideas. Please feel free to comment and talk about things that you've done that have allowed you to maintain that habit of fun and creating that kind of experience in your life, especially despite any impact of a physical limitation or chronic pain, um, or pain of any sort. So here's the original source of my inspiration recently. The show Bluey. The Disney cartoon that is trending a whole lot with children, and my children just found it recently, and so we've been watching a bit of the show called Bluey. And we watched an episode recently where I can't remember the title. I was gonna maybe look it up before I started this. I'm like, I don't know. I'll just explain what it was. That's really what matters. So what they were doing, Bluey and her friends, they were at this park, and well, it was essentially a grass field. There wasn't toys. It was mainly just an outdoor, big, grassy area with trees. And they were, what they call it? They said, "Hey, what should we do?" I'm summarizing this. It was actually like 2 weeks ago since I watched this, and so I'm probably going to mess up some of the details, but that's okay. The whole thing was like, "Hey, what should we do?" And they said, maybe it's called Shadowlands. That might be the title, because I think that's what they said. Let's play Shadowlands. If it's not that, I'm sorry. Well, we're just going to call it Shadowlands. And so one of the friends, I'm just going to keep this generic because I can't remember all the details again, but like one of the friends is like, "Hey, tell me the rules. Shadowlands sounds cool." And so then they explained, "All right, well, these are the rules. You can only walk on ground that is in a shadow. So it has to be a shadow from a tree or a vehicle or a building or something, but you just can't be on the ground where there's light, where there's sunlight touching it." And that's it. And I think they also had a destination. They're like, "We have to get from this part of the field to that area." Maybe it didn't start that way. They just started kind of running around in the shadows. But then they came to different points where the shadow was disconnected. It's like in between trees, right? Or something like that. and they came to the edge of the shadow, and the next shadow was like too far to like jump to. And one of the friends kept saying like, actually one of the friends would just almost step right out of the shadow, and the others would be like, no, 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 and they'd stop the friend and say, you can't do that. Like, why? This is too far of a gap. I can't get to that next shadow. And they say, why? Because that's against the rules. You can't break the rules. You gotta stay in the shadow. So they're like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? So then they run. They find it like a different route. Or they go to a different part of the shadow where the gap of light is smaller, so that they can get across it, and they can continue to let their feet just touch the ground that's in a shadow. So they get past that obstacle. Then they come to another obstacle, and they come to another part that's kind of tricky. And every time those situations happen, again, they had a bit of a debate of like, let's just change the rules, or let's make new rules. And every time the friend said, no, 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 you can't break the rules. We're not changing the rules. These are the rules. And one of the friends is getting frustrated, like, I don't like this game. Why do we have these rules? And they're kind of pointing out, we made these up. We made up these rules. Can't we just change them? And so this continues a few times. And then at the very end of the episode, there's a really large gap they're trying to get across. And at the time they do that, they get to that challenge, and like, there's no way we can make across this huge gap. There's not a way over this challenge. I don't know how we're going to stay in the shadow. And so then they're like, and they're thinking, and then all of a sudden, a storm comes in, and they're like some clouds. I think that's what it was. And like these clouds come across the sky, and it blocks the sun for just a moment, but the clouds are moving quickly. And so it blocks the sun for a moment. So then this huge gap in between shadows was now shaded because of the cloud. And so they are like, oh, run! And they all run while the ground is shadowed. But then, because the cloud was moving so fast, the sun started coming out. And so they were like kind of chasing this shadow. And they were just running as fast as they could. And it was challenging, but they made it. They made it to their destination. They all giggled and laughed and said, wow. And then finally that friend that was having a hard time with the rules reflected and said, you know what? I know why we have rules. And I know why we want to follow the rules. Because it makes it more fun. And they all giggle. And I mean, it's really simple, but it just kind of course, inspired me, kind of had me thinking. I'm like, yeah, isn't that fascinating? How rules can be a tool to create fun. And then a few days later, I'm at an actual park with my children, and there's this tire-like toy. Well, not a tire. It's circular. It's a hollow, but it's all plastic. It's this plastic. Maybe we can say it's a plastic tire because it's a ring. There we go. It's a ring. It's a plastic ring, and it is on some bearings, like some wheel bearings or something. So it just spins. It's like this, but it spins. It's level with the earth, but slightly tilted, and so you can sit on it, you can stand on it, and it has this slope, so it kind of is inconsistent in the way that it moves. And certain parts that you sit on will easily like start moving, and then when you get to the top, it'll slow down. And this is all like working with centrifugal force and gravity, and you can do cool things where you get the weight distributed quite right. I think I never saw this happen, but I'm like, if you get the weight distributed just right, this will be an unstoppable spin. Kids could sit on this thing, and because of the angle it was on, they can just keep spinning without anyone pushing them. I actually was hoping that could be the case, because I found myself pushing my children and other children at the park that were getting on this thing, and I had to just push them on it. And I'm like, I'm sure there's a way to make this just spin without my effort. But we couldn't figure it out. We couldn't get the weight distributed quite right. And of course the kids were just doing whatever they wanted, and I couldn't control that very well. So anyway, the what eventually happened was my kids stopped playing on it and they went and did something else, and so I was just a few steps away sitting and watching my kids. But then I looked over to the plastic, what I call it, ring, this ring, and there was a whole new set of kids, and they're on this ring and they're playing, and they do one thing and they like were giggling and laughing, and then I noticed something. They kind of got bored of that thing, and what did they do? They made some rules. I watched them do this over and over. They're like, okay, you could call this rules or goals, right? So they said, now, um, we have to all be standing, and we can't stop moving. We have to walk around the ring, and it's gonna spin, but we have to keep our balance and we have to stand. Okay? And they all did it. And then they did that, and they giggled and they laughed and they fell and they kept falling and they kept trying until they kind of got good at it. Then they got pretty good at it and they got bored. So they had to change the rules again. So then they're like, okay, now we gotta do it faster. We gotta walk on this ring even faster than that. And so they do it faster, and it's hard, and they fall and they giggle, and then they get better at it. So what do? They change the rules, and then they're like, okay, now we're gonna see who can stay on it the longest. So two of you get off, two of you stay on, and we're just going to see which of these two can stay. So they do this thing, and two of them, stay on it as long as they can until one falls off, and they all laugh and think it's so funny, and they have kind of a winner, and then they take one from the other two that were sitting, and now they try to see if they can stay on it longer than that person, kind of like a King of the Hill type of game, right? So that it's like they're using rules, goals, game concepts, and having the most fun. And again, I watch this and I'm like thinking about that and about Bluey, and I'm like, oh my word, kids are so good at this. And what can we learn from this as adults, as people who are dealing with pain or physical limitation? Can we look to these tools of rules, goals, and games to create fun and to create more fun in our lives? So a few things that I thought about or that I was reminded of is like little games that I've played, especially with mundane activities, like when I'm walking, um, to work. I will sometimes create a game, and this probably came from my childhood, not to step on any cracks. Any cracks in the sidewalk or in the road, don't step on the crack. Isn't there a song or a saying like, if you step on a crack, be careful about the crack. If you step on it, you'll break your back. Something like that. I don't know. But a really mundane activity of just walking. And when I created this little game, which again probably came from my childhood, I don't think I created it. I probably learned it from someone, but nonetheless, it's this little game or a goal to not let yourself step on the cracks. And it just makes a mundane activity a little more interesting and possibly even fun. And so I'm curious, again, if you have this practice in some of the small things, what are those? What have you done that others can look to as some ideas that they might try in their own life? Making little games or goals out of some of the mundane tasks. One thing that the reason why I think I fell out of this practice for many years is because of my pain, of course. And I had this story. I actually remember. So the other piece I want to talk about is lightheartedness. And I remember one time I had an interaction with my uncle, and this is one of my uncles who was just hilarious. He was a funny, lighthearted person, and everything was a joke. And honestly, for many years, that kind of personality kind of irritated me because I was not that fun person that's joking and laughing. I was, for many years, just kind of like in my own pain, right? And he, of course, noticed this, and I wouldn't have identified myself that way, but now looking back on those years, I'm like, yeah, I was just a kind of just like blah on life and things. Not necessarily blah on life, but blah on fun. I wasn't like creating fun, and I wasn't necessarily trying to make things lighthearted and laugh a lot. And even now, I don't think that has to go to that extreme. Anyway, but my uncle said he noticed this in me, that like the way I reacted to some of his jokes or just generally how I approach conversation. And he just told me, he said, listen, hey, like, lighten up. What's the deal? I should remember being really irritated by that. I was really bothered. And I was like, you don't get it. That was my reaction. Does that resonate with you? If someone came to you today and said, hey, lighten up, what would be your reaction? That's a good clue to you about where you are on this idea of creating fun or having an approach or a mindset that's a bit lighthearted. If you react like I did with just irritation, that's good to know. That's good awareness. And what I would invite you to do now, which I didn't have anyone inviting me to do this then, but really to ask yourself, why? Why am I irritated? And to me, at that time, of course, it was because it was that thought, like, you don't get it. You don't get it. And that might be a really common thing when you're dealing with pain or physical limitation. And see if that's coming up for you. Is it that, or is it a different version of that, or is it something else? Something that's like creating this irritation, this or discouragement or frustration that is kind of pointing to this underlying belief that fun isn't possible or lighthearted is hard because of my circumstance. And if that's the way that you're operating, it's, first of all, it's good to see that, and second, see if, like, challenge it. See if you can challenge it just gently. Like, is it really true that he doesn't get it? Actually, that is true. I still think that is true. He might not get it. But then my next question is like, so what? So what if he doesn't get it? Would an adjustment to my approach or my view of life to be a bit more lighthearted, would that be something I'm interested in? Given my limitations, right? Given my limitations or my challenges, I won't be able to adopt a style that my uncle has. In fact, that's never the goal, is to be like someone else. But the question is, what might this look like for me if I have a desire to create more fun or to be more lighthearted? So if that desire is there, then given my circumstance, what might I do? Or what might I think to create fun and approach things from a bit more lighthearted place? And the tools available are these, right? Inspired by children. Goals, games, rules. These are just a few tools we can use to create fun and to approach things from a more lighthearted place. So that's kind of a general thing, and it can be applied to mundane things or kind of day-to-day activities, or it can be applied on a larger scale. For example, big goals. Or it doesn't have to be big goals, but it could be a bit more. I'll just give an example of what I'm talking about. One of the goals I set when I was thinking about what would be fun, perhaps, for this year, 2024, I was like, I do a lot of reading, and it's related to self-development. It's related to my work beyond this and other things. I do a lot of reading, but it's mostly for the purpose of work, And I started to think, hey, why not read a novel? Do you know how long it's been since I've read a novel? It's been a long, long time. And so that's one of the goals I set for myself this year. And I just set a goal of one novel. And so that's one thing to think about, is like when you're thinking about goals, it's easy to get discouraged and be like, I can't do that. But like, what could you do? What might be reasonable, achievable, within reach? And you can think about those type of goals. So that's what this was for me. Read one novel. And do you know what? We're halfway through this year. I'd like to report I'm halfway through a novel. So we'll see if I get through it. I plan to get through it. I will get through it by the end of this year. That's my goal, and it's fun. And it's bringing some fun into my life. It's bringing some unique things into my life. some activity. The reading novels is not part of my normal tendencies. So that's one example. Or you can have bigger goals that are less oriented towards achievability, and they're more oriented toward possibility. They're big, they're dreamy, and they may not seem achievable, but that's okay, because even if you start to imagine goals like that, what kind of fun does that create in you? Does that create some lightheartedness? Like, that's the question. Every time you think about a goal, a rule, or a game, come back to like, hey, is this thing, is this idea, or is this activity, this rule, this game, this goal, is it creating fun for me in my activities, or is it creating some lightheartedness in me, in my mindset, and in my emotions? If the answer is yes, hey, how can we create more of that? Maybe let's do more of that. So that's what I have for you today. Some interesting ideas around rules, goals, games, and fun. Again, I'd love to hear from you. Any thoughts that you have, or putting any of this into practice. Let me know how it goes. Thank you so much for being part of the community. And until next time, bye everyone.